All right, so today we're jumping into a really powerful sermon that asks a huge question about the way we live now. It basically puts forward this idea that our constant chase for a life without any pain, well, that might actually be what's stopping us from finding real meaning and happiness. It's a fascinating idea, so let's get right into it.
So it all kicks off with this really simple but deep question. I mean, think about your own life, right? We have a million ways to numb ourselves, to get distracted, to just avoid any kind of discomfort, from tiny little annoyances all the way up to really deep emotional pain. But what's the hidden cost of running away from it all the time?
And this is really the heart of the diagnosis, coming from the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who is a big inspiration for the source material. He calls it algophobia, literally a fear of pain. And his argument is that this fear has become like the central, unspoken rule of our time. It shapes everything about us, from our own private anxieties to the very way our society works.
So, what does a whole society built on this fear of pain actually look like? Well, the sermon that we're digging into has a very specific and kind of chilling name for it.
It's called the Palliative Society. And the idea here is that we've started treating all suffering, big or small, like it's just a medical problem, something to be fixed with a painkiller, whether that's an actual pill or just binge watching a show. Pain isn't seen as a shared part of being human anymore. Instead, it's this private, technical issue that you're supposed to solve on your own, and quietly.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit and see how this big societal fear actually feels on the inside, on a really personal level.
The source uses this fantastic metaphor from Tim Burton's old stop-motion film, Vincent. We become like that little boy, Vincent, totally trapped inside our own heads. Our own anxious imagination starts painting the entire world as this scary, monstrous place. And so we spend all our energy trying to run away from this inner monster. But, and this is the key, that monster, it's just a part of us. It's our own shadow. And you can't outrun your own shadow. The only way through is to actually stop, turn around, and face it.
And to build on that, the sermon uses this amazing image from the story of Sinbad. It's this idea that we all think we've built ourselves a nice, safe little island to live on, away from all the chaos. But that safety is an illusion. It's actually the back of a giant fish. And the second a real crisis hits, the moment we light a fire, that fish is going to dive. And we're thrown right back into the deep, chaotic waters we were trying so hard to avoid.
So, what happens when this private, fragile bubble of safety we've built for ourselves smashes head-on into a real, undeniable, collective tragedy?
Yeah, what happens? In a society where we're all just trying to protect our own little safe island, how on earth do we handle a trauma that affects everyone? Well, the source material uses a really painful and recent example to explore this.
October 29, 2022. During the Halloween celebrations in Itaewon, Seoul, a deadly crowd crush occurred, sending shockwaves across the entire nation. And that tragedy is represented by this number: 158 young people lost their lives. The sermon doesn't just call it a tragedy, it calls it a social disaster, a brutal wake-up call for a society that does everything it can to look away from pain.
But there was a counter-response. The sermon highlighted the work of media outlets like Hankiore 21 for doing exactly this, for taking that abstract number and turning it back into real, detailed, individual stories. And this points to a massive insight. Real empathy means we have to fight that urge to just forget and move on. It means we have to remember the details, to feel the weight of every single one of those precious lives.
Now, this whole theme of suffering and avoiding it doesn't just stop with us or our society. The sermon zooms the lens way out and connects it to a crisis that's happening on a planetary scale. Just look at this wild contrast from the winter of 2022 to 2023. At the exact same time, North America was getting hammered by this crazy bomb cyclone, with temperatures down to -45 Celsius. Parts of Europe were basking in 20 degrees summer-like weather. The source presents this as a planet that's literally groaning in pain, a global system knocked completely out of balance. So what's going on here scientifically? Well, the source breaks it down for us. Basically, as the Arctic gets warmer and warmer, the temperature gap between it and the rest of the world shrinks. That gap is what keeps the jet stream, this river of air high above us, strong and stable. But as the gap weakens, the jet stream starts to get wavy and wobble, kind of like a spinning top that's losing speed. And that wobble is what allows freezing polar air to spill way down south and hot tropical air to surge way up north. And that's how you get these insane extremes.
And here's the thing. Just like with social tragedies, the pain from this planetary crisis isn't spread out evenly. The sermon points to specific examples, like a fire in Gangnam's last shantytown, or the devastating floods that trapped people in basement apartments. These disasters always hit the most vulnerable people the hardest. It draws a direct line. The pain of the planet becomes the very real, unavoidable suffering of the poor.
So after painting this really tough picture, from our own internal anxieties to social tragedy to a planet in crisis, the source makes a huge pivot. It stops and asks, okay, after all of that, where in the world do we find hope?
And the sermon finds its answer right here, in this verse from the prophet Zechariah. Now, you got to remember, he was speaking to people who had just come back from exile. Their city was in ruins, their situation was desperate, and yet the message he gives them isn't, don't worry, all your pain is about to disappear. It's something else, something totally different.
And this is the absolute key. The hope that's being offered here isn't a future without pain. It's the promise of presence, it's solidarity, it's community, it's that divine I am with you, right in the thick of all the hardship. It suggests that real joy isn't about escaping pain, it's about not having to go through it all alone.
And that leads us to the final, and maybe most radical idea of all. If happiness is not the absence of pain, then what on earth is it?
The sermon lays out this incredible contrast. On one side, you have what it calls an immature way of being. It's like the princess and the pea. You're hyper-focused and hysterical about every tiny little discomfort in your own life, completely oblivious to the world. But on the other side is a mature way. The source calls this carrying the cross, and it means you deliberately shift your focus away from your own small pains and toward the much bigger suffering of your neighbors, actively choosing to help carry their burdens.
This whole idea is just captured so perfectly in this line from the celebrated Korean poet Yoon Dong-ju. He talks about a happy Jesus Christ who is in pain, and then says he hopes that a cross will be permitted for him. I mean, think about how wild that is. The idea that you could find a deep, almost paradoxical happiness, not by avoiding a burden, but by embracing one for the sake of others.
And that's the question we're left with. This whole explainer really challenges us to rethink our entire search for happiness. It suggests that maybe true meaning isn't found on that little, isolated, comfortable island we try to build for ourselves. Maybe it's found when we dive into the messy, painful, but ultimately beautiful ocean of life and learn how to swim alongside each other.